Not sure why I'm bothering to type this all out. I guess I'm hoping that it'll help me make sense of things. That it may reveal details I hadn't noticed before, but I doubt it. I'm really starting to lose it. So is everybody else. I'll start at the beginning. I got to the university at around 10 this morning. I had an exam for intermediate philosophy, an elective course, just figured I'd get it out of the way during the summer. I don't remember seeing or hearing anything weird when I first walked into the building. Then again, I wasn't really paying attention. My eyes were glued to my notes, an attempt at some last-second cramming, although I distinctly recall first entering the building through a door that I'd gone through many times before. The weird shit started with the exam itself. The questions on the first page seemed relevant enough to the material that we'd been taught in class, but then I turned the page over, and I couldn't understand what I was looking at. It was a diagram of some bizarre, complex shape. Could have been a machine of sorts. The part that scared me was that it vaguely seemed similar. Not enough for me to be able to place where exactly I'd seen it before, but enough to invoke this distant recognition. It made my skin crawl. Whatever the memory was, it had most certainly been an unpleasant one. There was no question below it. Actually, the rest of the page was completely blank. I raised my hand while continuing to stare at the diagram, thinking that maybe they'd given me a misprinted copy. When no one came over to me, I looked around the room, seeing that it wasn't actually a proctor or supervisor present at all, just a bunch of confused-looking students. Thinking back, I was sure that I'd seen a person standing at the front of the room when I'd first entered. It was the same person who told us that we could begin writing, but it hadn't been the professor. It hadn't been anyone I'd ever seen before. I hadn't questioned it at the time. None of us really knew what to do. And eventually, someone got up, left the room, and then a few more followed. But most of us stayed seated. I guess we were still under the assumption that if we left, we'd be in big trouble. A product of years and years of academic conditioning. After a few minutes, one of the students came back. His eyes were wide. He told that there was something weird going on. That the doors at the main entrance were now missing. It was a difficult thing to believe, but the guy had said it with such fear and sincerity that it compelled us to stand up and leave the room in order to confirm. And he happened to be right. Where the doors should have been was just a blank, solid wall. Somebody suggested that it could have been construction. Everybody else argued that that was impossible. We were in the lecture hall for no more than 20 minutes. What kind of construction starts and ends so suddenly? Of course, the next step was to go and check the other exits, find out whether or not we'd actually been trapped there. I knew the layout of the building fairly well, not like the back of my hand, but I'd been here enough. It was reasonably large, 3 stories tall, probably a basement as well. I knew that there were 4 different exits. Though it wouldn't have surprised me if there were more. After scouring every inch of the first floor, I could feel my heart dropping down into my stomach. Every exit that I clearly remembered existing before was gone. All replaced by a blank wall. Afterwards, I walked back to the main foyer where most everybody else had gathered, all of them with this stunned look on their faces. Somebody brought up the fact that all the windows were missing as well. We all looked at her. And then we looked around. She was right. It was something we hadn't noticed at first because the shock of the missing doors had overridden it. They were all gone. Even the large glass panes on the roof. People were shaking their heads, their expressions a mix of confusion and deep distress. Some paced around, muttering to themselves. A few of them were cursing out loud. I observed the group. There were maybe around 30 of us, and I only recognized a few faces, but that made sense given that I had barely shown up to any lectures and I only knew one of their names. Rachel. She was standing separate from everyone else, looking intently at her phone. I'd sat beside her during the first class of the semester, where they'd forced us to participate in a series of icebreakers. We'd exchanged numbers then, but neither of us had reached out afterwards. She noticed me and offered a tight smile. She walked over, asking if I had any cell reception. I checked and saw that I didn't, which wasn't normal. Not that I'd ever had good reception in this building, but there'd always been at least one or two bars. Now I had absolutely nothing, as if I were out in the middle of the woods or something. She then asked me if I had internet access. I could see that I was still connected to the university Wi-Fi, though. Everything seemed to be loading at a snail's pace. She said she was experiencing something similar. She tried sending out some emails to the administration asking what the hell was going on, but they hadn't been delivered. I have a friend, James, who was also supposed to be on campus that day to write a different exam. I tried calling him on Instagram, but the connection was too poor for it to go through. Then I tried sending him a message, asking him to walk over to the building, tell me what he saw from the outside. The message took a painfully long time to go through, but eventually it did. While we waited for a response, Rachel brought up the fact that there was a bridge on the second floor connecting this building to the Earth Sciences. With nothing better to do, we went up the stairs in order to check it out, but we weren't the first ones there. A group of 3 were already standing in front of it. They looked like they'd just seen a ghost, blood drained from their faces. When we rounded the corner, we understood why. The bridge was there, but it was dark. Not dark as in the lights weren't working. I mean, there was just nothing there beyond it. A complete absence of everything, an outright void. We couldn't even see a few inches into it before the light was completely smothered. It wasn't even gradual, it just stopped. Staring at it was uncanny. I began to wonder if maybe it was actually just a black wall. I grabbed an empty water bottle out of my backpack, preparing to throw it in, when one of the other guys told me not to bother. "We tried that," he said. "It's not solid. It's not a wall." Rachel asked him if anybody tried to go in there. He shook his head. He told her fuck no, but that she could be their guest. She stared at it for a long while, and it almost looked like she was considering it, but she didn't move. Soon a few more people came up, and we caught them up to speed. By now, there were about 10 of us just standing in front of it, all waiting for somebody else to go in. A silent tension hung in the air as if there was some kind of bizarre trap. Eventually, somebody volunteered to check it out. A guy I didn't recognize at all, tall, muscular, buzz cut, a tattoo of a chainsaw on his arm. Said his name was Arnold. He approached the darkness carefully and stopped a few feet in front of it. Then he just stared ahead. We asked him what he saw. He said, "Nothing at all." He tried using his phone's flashlight, but it couldn't pierce even an inch of the gloom. It was clear that he didn't want to go in, but that he nevertheless committed himself to it. Finally, he moved. He was in there for about 5 seconds before he came sprinting back out. And I mean sprinting like hell, all the way downstairs without sparing a moment to stop and explain what had happened. We kept looking into the dark, expecting something to come running out after him, but that didn't happen. Nothing moved, and nothing made a noise. We went back down to the first floor and found Arnold hauling chairs from the cafeteria into the foyer. Somebody ran up to stop him, but he pushed them away, told them to fuck off. He began launching chairs at the drywall, tossing multiple in rapid succession. Then he picked one up and began using it like a blunt tool and smashing away. He'd become absolutely feral. Before long, he'd excavated a human-sized hole. We ran up to him, tried to calm him down. He just went harder. Eventually, his body gave up and he was forced to rest, and that's when he finally told us what happened in the bridge. There were people up there, he said, in between long, labored breaths. We glanced at each other, and then we asked him to explain. He took another deep breath and told us that almost immediately after he'd walked in, he ran into something that was blocking the way. But it wasn't a wall or a random object, it was a person. A group of people, he realized. All standing perfectly still in the dark. He said he knew they were people because he could feel their skin. But now that he was thinking about it, he wasn't sure they were actually people at all because the skin was cold, clammy. The texture was strange. He said he could hear them breathing, but the exhales were too quick, as if they were panting. He said that their breath smelled like rotting gasoline, whatever that was supposed to be. He said that they were whispering terrible things to him, things about him that they shouldn't have known. Once he recovered enough energy, he was smashing the wall again. We could do nothing but stand in silence as we watched him. I didn't want to believe any of what he just said, but his fear seemed real. Something had definitely happened to him up there. Soon a few others picked up chairs and joined him, which led to more, and then Rachel and I had chairs in our hands as well. We spent about an hour smashing away until we realized something wasn't right. Because we should have been outside by now, but the wall just kept going, just endless drywall. We measured the distance between where we were now and where the wall started. Nearly 10 feet. Maybe our sense of distance had just been distorted. So we kept going for another hour. 18 feet. It was still the same story. As if they'd built an entirely new wall under 20 minutes. One that was inexplicably thick. A civil engineer major pointed out that the wall itself was impossible, that it wasn't structurally feasible because there was no metal frame. That there weren't even any pipes or insulation, that nobody would have signed off on this, especially not a university building. I didn't know what to think. But this seemed to be going nowhere, so I put my chair down, walked over to the cafeteria, and sat down in front of an empty coffee shop. It looked like it was still open. There's a half-filled pot of coffee in the back, pastries, sandwiches, displayed in the glass. All the lights still on, it was just devoid of any staff. Then I realized that the only people in the entire building seemed to be the people who'd been writing the exam. It was a fact that bothered me so much I forced myself not to dwell on it. I was tired, starving. So I went behind the counter and I poured myself some coffee, grabbed one of the sandwiches, bit later, I was joined by Rachel and a few others. Others have gone off in different directions, likely still in search of another exit. Another group continues trying to break through the wall, and every now and then they'll walk out of the hole with their shirts drenched in sweat, holding broken chairs. They'll come over, grab more before going back in. Their expressions are trance-like. I can see that some of their hands are bleeding. As I was writing this, I got a text back from James. He says that he went to the building, he saw it surrounded by cops and police tape, said that he tried getting up close but was stopped, told it was a no-go zone, though they'd refused to give him any explanation. Said he saw all the entrances covered by what looked like large white tents, each one guarded by officers wearing body armor, holding rifles. I've been planning on asking him to contact the police. I was hoping that might help. But now I really don't know what to do. It's 10 p.m. here. We've been in this building for just over 12 hours. By now, we've searched the entire place about a dozen times over, checking every corner, every hallway, every room, coming to the same conclusion every time. On the third floor, we found a maintenance room and a ladder, presumably leading to the roof. We broke through the hatch and... you know what we found? A bunch of wet dirt. As if the building had somehow become buried underground. The dirt was at least soft enough that if we were really inclined to, we might be able to crawl up through it, but we're not desperate enough for that. Not yet. We're sitting in the library now. We moved away from the cafeteria because the group digging into the wall was starting to freak us out. They were looking worse for wear every time they came back out, faces dripping with sweat, the skin on their hands slowly tearing away. Cafeteria was running out of chairs. We tried convincing them to stop, told them that they must have excavated hundreds of feet of drywall, and yet they were still going nowhere. But they wouldn't listen. They almost seemed possessed, deathly intent on the idea that eventually they'd make it out. I got a message from James telling me that there's still police surrounding every inch of the building, that they've expanded the perimeter so that nobody can get a good look at it. Multiple SWAT teams have arrived. There's heard sporadic gunshots ringing through the air. I don't want to say that we've given up, but we really don't know what to do. There's 4 of us here: Rachel, Jason, Amira, and myself. We didn't know Jason or Amira. We just happened to end up together. Most people have split off into smaller groups, though. I've seen a few sitting or standing by themselves. We've been talking a lot, trying to figure it out, to rationalize things. Amira thinks we've ended up in hell, and that it explains why everyone else has disappeared. I told her that doesn't make any sense. I mean, because why us? Huh? Why a bunch of university students writing a philosophy exam? She looked at me, asked if I'd ever done anything terrible. I told her sure, but so was almost everybody else. So why were we singled out? She didn't respond to that. She then changed the topic, asked us what we'd seen on the second page of our exams. I thought about that strange-looking machine, about how it seemed so familiar, but I still couldn't place it. I guess it was some memory that had been buried too deep. Amira told us that the only thing on her paper had been a sketch of a man's face. Middle-aged, disheveled hair, scars all across. She said she'd seen that man before, a long time ago. She'd been on a family vacation on a beach somewhere. It was nighttime. She'd snuck out of the hotel with a cousin. They were sitting on the sand in the dark, staring out at the ocean when they saw a figure ahead, sitting waist deep in the water. Each wave that rolled onto the beach was heavy enough to completely submerge the guy, but this didn't seem to bother him. He just sat there. This entire time they thought that he was facing towards the ocean, but then the clouds cleared and the moonlight revealed that he was actually looking straight at them, staring with eyes so wide he had to be forcing them open. She said that he stood up, and seconds later he was running towards them. Of course, they immediately began sprinting away, but by the time Amira got back to the hotel, her friend was no longer there. She told her parents and police were involved, and neither of them were ever found. Jason said that his paper contained only a phone number, 123-456-7890. The same number he'd gotten a call from the day that his former roommate had committed suicide. He was in his old apartment working on an assignment when he saw the number pop up on his screen. Bored and curious, he picked it up. He said that the voice on the other end was robotic, genderless. It sounded automated. And the only thing it said was that his roommate, Kyle, was about to die. He thought it was some fucked up prank until he heard a banging noise coming from Kyle's room. He rushed over there and swung open the door, and Kyle was standing on a chair in the middle of the room with a noose around his neck. There was a little girl sitting on the windowsill behind him, wearing a large hat that covered her eyes and nose. Kyle grinned at him before suddenly kicking the chair away. Jason tried to save him, but he wasn't able to. After Kyle went unconscious, the little girl started to laugh at him and then jumped out of the window. They were on the 17th floor, and then he remembered that Kyle never had a window in his room. The police were never able to trace the call. It came back as a dead number. This entire time, Rachel hadn't said anything at all. The blood had drained from her skin, and she was staring down at the floor. We assured her that she didn't have to talk about it if she wasn't comfortable talking about it. She took a deep breath and said that her exam had a Polaroid photo taped to it. A photo of herself in her childhood bedroom, taken from inside the closet. She said that she had a boyfriend in high school named Chris. One night, they were both sitting in her room, and for whatever reason, they began to argue. It turned ugly, and then Chris ran into her closet and shut the door. She thought that he was being immature and told him to come out, but he said nothing and just stayed in there. She then walked over and opened the door. But he wasn't there. And her closet was tiny. There was nowhere he could have been hiding. But then she heard a noise coming from above, coming from the ceiling. Something like somebody laughing, but not Chris's voice, like an elderly woman's. She closed the door and told her dad what had happened. He called the police and they searched the entire house, but they could neither find Chris nor the woman. Chris was never seen again. Then they all looked at me. I told them that I'd seen the diagram of some sort of machine, but that I genuinely couldn't remember what it was supposed to be. I'm not sure if they believed me, but none of them pressed me about it. Of course, it freaked me the fuck out, because if those things had happened to them, then what the fuck happened to me? What was my brain trying to erase? Amira suggested that we go back into the exam room so I could take a look at it, jog my memory. I told her absolutely the hell not, that I had no interest in finding out, but then Rachel said that she was pretty sure she'd left her phone charger in that room. so she was going to go over there anyway. We agreed to accompany her. When we got there, we found that somebody had turned the lights off. Problem was, we didn't know exactly where the lights were. Maybe somewhere on the rightmost wall. We walked inside, and I was about to turn on my phone flashlight when Rachel stopped me. She told us to be quiet. So we did. And then we could hear it. The faint sound of several pencils scribbling against paper. As our eyes adjusted to the dark, we could make out the silhouettes of several figures sitting down, hunched over the desks. We ran out of there and shut the door behind us, and then barricaded it with chairs. On our way back to the library, we passed by the hole in the wall and noticed that it had gone silent. It hadn't been silent for a while. Jason took this to mean that they'd finally tunneled their way back outside, that they just hadn't bothered coming back in to let us know. I wasn't so sure about that, but he'd already ran inside. We followed after him, doing our best to traverse through the crooked, uneven path. It was surprising just how long it stretched on for, but at some point, the air started to become so cold and crisp, and then we could see daylight. Gray and muted, but unmistakable against the darkness. Jason became ecstatic. He turned around with his huge smile on his face and said that we'd done it, that we were going to make it out. But something wasn't right about this because there shouldn't have been daylight. Because he was half past midnight. He began running faster, and we struggled to keep up, but soon the tunnel had reached its end. Soon we were outside, just not anywhere I recognized, not anywhere where we should have been. Somehow we were now out in the fucking ocean. Thick gray clouds rolled across the sky above, heavy thunder rumbling in the distance. Rain came down in a light drizzle. In front of us was what looked like a giant metal platform, like a vast, sprawling sewer grate hovering above the water. I was hesitant to step on it, but I tested it with my foot and it seemed to be sturdy. We walked out onto it and looked around, though it was hard to describe what we saw. It was like a floating city constructed entirely out of steel. The more I looked around, the more uncanny the architecture seemed. The buildings were too pointed, almost sword-like. They were also built in a way that seemed haphazard, nonsensical. There were vast stretches of empty space, but also areas where several buildings converged into one, forming a grotesque-looking metallic behemoth of a structure. They almost looked like giant metal tumors. Some buildings were tall enough to pierce the clouds, while others were no larger than a shed. Some of them were unorthodox shapes. There was a pyramid, a sphere, a pentagon. Some buildings seemed to be hovering in the air without any visible support. There were lights in some of the windows, though. There didn't seem to be anybody around. The air smelled like raw fish, smoke, gasoline. There was a constant grating noise in the background. It sounded like metal being sharpened. Every time lightning flashed above the clouds, we could see the outline of colossal figures in the sky. One of them looked like a human skull, another like a serpent with thousands of tendrils. Jason's expression took a sharp turn from hopeful to unbridled anguish. He knelt down, he buried his face in his hands. We tried to pull him to his feet, but he wouldn't budge. Rachel pointed out somebody in the distance, standing on top of one of the buildings. We thought it could have been Arnold because he was wearing the same red shirt. It looked like he was watching us. We debated whether or not we should try to call out to him, but we decided to stay silent. And after a while, he walked off the edge, plummeting what looked like hundreds of feet down to the platform. The fall should have been enough to turn his body into a pancake, but he landed. He landed perfectly on his feet. seeming no worse for wear. But then, he got down on all fours and began crawling towards us. He was a shocking enough visual that it kind of paralyzed us for a moment before we were able to regain our bearings. We turned, we bolted back towards the tunnel, but we couldn't find Jason. We looked around until we saw him sitting on the rails at the edge of the platform. We called out to him, but he paid us no attention. And then he jumped. Before he could even hit the water, a gigantic pale hand shot up from the ocean, grabbed him, dragged him down. I looked at my feet through the openings in the platform. Hovering just below the surface of the water was what looked like a human face. Probably about a dozen feet wide. The best I can describe the expression on his face is that of enthusiastic malice. As if it just couldn't wait to hurt us. I looked back at Arnold, and now he was close enough for us to see that his head had been twisted all the way around. We ran back into the tunnel, crashing through the drywall until we made it back inside the building. We began barricading it with tables, chairs, whatever we could find, but nothing followed us back. We sat on the floor and we caught our breaths. We're still sitting here. There's been little discussion about what we just saw. Seems like we're all at a loss for words. So we've just seen a group of students walking out of the cafeteria, each one carrying a kitchen knife. We asked them what they were doing. When they turned to face us, we could see their forearms were all caked with blood. They told us they'd found a way out through the basement, that there was a hidden tunnel in one of the walls that would take us outside, but that first they needed to get rid of the people blocking the way. They asked us if we wanted to join, that there was a lot of people down there and that they could use our help. Rachel asked them what these people looked like. They told us, like statues. Large, pale, naked, stiff. But they knew that they weren't statues because they screamed and bled. And they could be killed. They asked us again if we wanted to join. And the most disturbing part was that they didn't seem to be crazed or delusional. Their expression was lucid. Their voices earnest. Maybe they were telling the truth. But we still couldn't do it. We continued sitting there. We were starting to hear strange things, muffled chanting coming from beneath us, heavy footsteps from directly above us, as if several people had started running around in circles. One of the doors next to us suddenly opened, but nobody came out. We all got up and walked away from it. We walked back into the library, but now we weren't alone. We found some more students in there, 3 of them, huddled tightly together near one of the desks. They glanced over at us as we walked in, but they just as quickly looked away. We sat down across from them, tried talking to them, asking how they were holding up. But they only gave us one-word answers before shrinking back into their group. They were now whispering to each other with these huge smiles on their faces, clearly trying to hold back laughter. Every now and then they'd glance towards us, and their laughter would go up a pitch, become more boisterous. Soon they were just openly cackling, tears coming out of their eyes, fists pounding the table. Finally, we snapped and screamed at them, asked them what the fuck was supposed to be so funny. It was like a switch had been flipped and they all went silent, their expressions frozen in this hateful glare. One of them stared directly at me and asked if I remembered what happened during that camping trip in Colorado. I asked them what the fuck they're talking about. "You don't remember the cabin," the guy responded. And that was enough for my brain to connect things. A rush of memories came flooding back, memories that had been repressed for a reason. Immediately, I stood up and stormed out of the library. Behind me, I could hear them starting to laugh again. Rachel and Amir followed me out, asking me what that was about. I told them that I now remembered where I'd seen that machine. I'm not sure exactly how old I was. Maybe my early teens. We were on our annual family camping trip in the mountains. It was my parents, my brother Derek, and myself. One night, Derek and I were walking through the woods while our parents were preparing dinner. It was evening, the sky above a brilliant orange-red as the sun prepared to set. We didn't wander too far from the camp. We knew the woods well, but not well enough. We weren't dumb. Which is why we were surprised to find a cabin sitting in the middle of a clearing. We'd surveyed the area so thoroughly before settling on a place to pitch our tents that there's almost no chance we wouldn't have come across it in the process, but there it was. What we found strange was how well maintained it seemed to be. The wood had yet to start rotting, the paint was immaculate, and the windows were clean. There were even flowers growing out of several colorful pots placed around the entrance. If it had looked like something out of a horror movie instead of some grandma's retirement home, I'm sure we would have ran back to our parents and told them about it, but instead, we became curious. We took the bait. We walked up to the door and prepared to knock on it, only to find that it was already slightly open. At that moment, I remember feeling a cool wind coming out from the crack. I didn't like it. It frightened me. I told Derek that we should leave, but he waved me off and pushed the door open the rest of the way. The interior of the place didn't match what we'd seen outside. It was completely empty. I mean, it was just one large room, no doors, no stairs leading to a second floor despite there being a balcony above, peeling walls, dust covering every surface, a heavy smell of mothballs. Everything about it was just a big fuck no. The only thing inside was the machine. It was just sitting there a few feet away from the entrance, about the size of a basketball. Once again, I implored Derek to get the hell out of there, but he wasn't listening. He seemed transfixed by the thing, his eyes glued to it as if it were the most fascinating thing in the world. It almost looked like he was in a trance or something. It freaked me the fuck out. I tried physically dragging him away, but it was like his feet were glued to the floor. I had to shake him for well over a minute to finally snap him out of it. We went back to our campsite. And remembering the next part filled me with guilt and regret. We never ended up telling our parents about the cabin. There had been nobody inside, so no danger, right? We forgot about it. We ate dinner and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw that Derek was no longer in his sleeping bag. I looked around for him, eventually spotting him disappearing into the trees. I grabbed my flashlight and followed after him, but he was moving fast. I started sprinting and calling out to him, asking him where the hell he was going. I chased him all the way towards the cabin, but he had already gone inside by the time I had reached the clearing. The door was wide open, and there was a dim light emanating from inside. I slowed my pace. I really didn't want to follow him inside, but I continued to inch my way closer. I was only a few feet away when a man appeared inside the doorway, nearly giving me a heart attack. He looked to be in his 70s, extremely tall, sickly thin. Thick black veins bulging across his hands and arms, wearing a tattered suit, bearing this forced smile, his mouth filled with large, fake-looking teeth. He waved once at me before suddenly slamming the door shut. I ran back to our campsite. I told my parents what had happened. My dad grabbed his gun while my mom started packing everything up. I led him over to the clearing, and he told me to go back and wait with my mom before storming up to the house and kicking down the door. We waited for about 15 minutes before he came back, carrying Derek in his arms. He continued carrying him as we hiked down the mountain in the darkness. I remember him looking over his shoulder every few seconds. Nobody said a word. Not even as we made it back to the parking lot, got inside of our car, and began driving away. I tried talking to Derek, but he was unresponsive. He was completely out of it. His eyes glazed over in a way that terrified me. Of course, my mom and I both pleaded my dad for answers, but he didn't offer one. He stayed completely silent until we made it back home. He dropped my mom and I off before telling us that he was taking Derek to the hospital. He didn't explain what for. Derek never came back home. He stayed in the hospital for a few months until he was transferred to a different facility, put under the care of specialists, as I'd been told. I didn't know what it meant back then. I still have no idea. I never saw my brother again. My dad never explained what he saw in that cabin. As you can guess, it kind of drove me mad over the years. I wanted answers so bad to the point where I tried going back up the mountain myself several years later. I never found that cabin again. And when my dad found out what I'd done, he sent me to a psychiatrist named John. I think he was a psychiatrist. I don't really remember his title, but I guess he did a great job because I ended up repressing the entire thing, replacing it with a false sequence of memories. My brother had fallen ill shortly after our trip. He never recovered from it. This is the story my brain had run with all these years. And quite frankly, I think I was better off for it. This was a horrible fucking thing to suddenly remember. I guess I must have looked pretty mortified because Rachel came over and tried to comfort me, telling me the same things that John had. How it wasn't my fault. How there's nothing I could have done. I didn't believe John then. I didn't believe Rachel now. But I still appreciated the effort. The past was the past. Effort was wasted dwelling on it. Amira, on the other hand, hadn't said anything. She was just staring at me with this confused expression. After a while, she asked me something. Are you sure that's what happened? I asked her why she was asking me that. Because we're in hell, she responded. They'd want you to think that. They'd want you to think every horrible thing imaginable. Rachel rolled her eyes, asked her to quit it. That's not productive, she explained. Just stop. I was never at that beach, Amira continued, ignoring her. There was no man. I had no cousin. None of it happened. I asked her why she had suddenly changed her mind, because earlier she had seemed so convinced that this was something that had actually happened to her. Because the devil's here, she responded. Rachel asked her if that was supposed to be a metaphor or something. No, the devil's here right now. I can see him. She pointed to somewhere behind us. Rachel and I turned around. We couldn't see anything at first. It was just a dark hallway. But then our eyes adjusted and we could discern a head peeking out from one of the open lockers. I asked Amir how she knew that was the devil. She said that it spoke to her. But not through words, that it was trying to taunt her, trying to drive fear into her heart. If that's the devil, then why are you smiling? Rachel asked. Shouldn't we get the fuck away from him? We won't escape him. But we don't have to be scared of him either. Because that's what he wants. Her smile grew wider. Just don't give him what he wants. Then we'll all be fine. Rachel shook her head. What the fuck are you talking about? She grabbed Amir's hand, tried to pull her away from the hallway, but she wouldn't budge. Suddenly all the locker doors swung open at once. We froze, staring into the dark. Please, Rachel whispered, now a quiver in her voice. Don't do this. Let's go. Amir kept smiling. I'm not afraid. Rachel shook her head, looked at me. Run, she said. So we did. We didn't hear any footsteps behind us, but we could hear Amir continuing to shout at the top of her lungs for the devil to come get her, that she wasn't afraid. It lasted only a few seconds before she went quiet. We didn't really know where to go, and nowhere felt particularly safe. There was another library on the second floor, but we'd have to move past the bridge to get to it. So we avoided that. We decided to head towards the food court, which was also on the second floor, but all the way on the other end. The closer we got to it, the more we could smell something. Like burning meat in the air. Something getting exponentially stronger with every step we took. Soon the air had become dark with rancid smoke. We pulled our shirts up over our noses and peeked out from around the corner leading to the court. We could see 5 or 6 of our fellow students sitting in a circle in front of the subway. Laid in between them was what looked like a charred, burning corpse. They were just staring at it. Sitting close enough to the flames, they should have been suffocated by it. The students were rocking slowly back and forth, heads tilted slightly to the ceiling. They were making these weird twitching motions with their hands. Their fingers were all horrifically bent and twisted. Then we blinked and the fire disappeared. No water dumped on it, nothing to suffocate it. It was just gone in an instant, inexplicably deleted from the universe. The students stopped, and we stood there in pin-drop silence until the burnt, smoking figure sat up on its own. And that's when we realized how big it was. Its shoulders rising well past their heads. We turned around, backed away as silently as we could. Currently, we're taking refuge in some random classroom. And it seems safe in here. But whatever else that's happened, who knows when that'll change. We can't stay here forever. We need to figure something out. We decided to go up to the 3rd floor. Not sure what we were hoping to find, but where else could we go? The 3rd floor consisted mostly of smaller classrooms, an administrative office, a small student pub tucked away in one of the corners. We headed for the pub, breathing simultaneous sighs of relief once we found it empty. I sat at the bar while Rachel went behind it and began pouring up 2 rum and cokes, both with more rum than coke. She sat next to me, finished the drink in one gulp, and then buried her face in her hands. She asked me if I thought Amira was right. If we really were in hell. I sipped my drink and told her that I didn't, but that I also didn't have an explanation for what this could have been, if not hell. That I couldn't even really believe it was happening. That it all felt so surreal. That I wasn't fully convinced that this wasn't a dream. Rachel said that this couldn't have been a dream, so I asked her what she thought it was. After some thinking, she said that maybe all of us had just gotten extremely unlucky, marked to suffer at the hands of some unknowable cosmic force for reasons we were never meant to understand. I nodded and made myself another drink. She looked at me. "Do you think we still have a chance of getting out of here?" she asked. I told her that even if I didn't, I wouldn't have admitted it. That it was better to be optimistically delusional than to give up. She smiled and said that she liked that answer, and that I better not go insane on her or else she'll kill me. I told her likewise, and we grabbed some knives from the cabinet behind the bar and then ventured back out. As we were walking, Rachel asked me if it seemed darker now. I considered this carefully. It was just barely noticeable, but I could tell that it was. And in a strange way, it wasn't as if the lights themselves had dimmed, more so that it was being smothered by something. The air just seemed thicker, heavier, weighed down by some intangible element. We discovered the source of it when we walked over to the atrium and looked down over the railings at the lower floors. At first, it was hard to understand what we were seeing. It looked like the first floor had been completely submerged by a void, just a blanket of sheer gloom extending nearly halfway up to the second floor. Thick, dark spirals drifting up from it like smoke, gradually spreading through the air. But unlike smoke, it felt cold. Slowly, it was becoming harder to breathe, the air growing saturated by this inscrutable stench. Something sharp, pungent, metallic, as if an old medicine cabinet had been doused with blood and then lit on fire. We then noticed that it was rising, getting closer to us, not just the smoke, but the actual darkness itself, as if it were being pumped in from somewhere. It wasn't moving fast, but eventually it would reach us. We backed away from the railing and then stared at each other, as if the other person might have an answer. Which, of course, neither of us did. The panic hits much harder when time becomes your enemy, when the threat is so ominous but still yet to be defined. But what happened when it reached us? We were determined not to find out. We took some deep breaths and then settled on a purely logical approach. The darkness was moving up towards us, so how could we escape it? By moving up ourselves, Rachel said. I was about to ask her how until I realized where she was going with this. The maintenance room. The hatch. The dirt. Theoretically, it could be a way out, maybe the only way out. I just didn't like it. I wasn't a fan. She asked if I had any other suggestions. I told her I didn't. I tried to come up with something, but my brain was firing blanks. I looked back over the railing. The darkness was still climbing, getting closer, and now I could see something poking up from it. It was a gigantic head connected to a thick, dark, slimy stalk which was connected to God knows what. It hovered in place for a while before turning up to look at us. It was Jason's head, bloated up to about 10 times the size it should have been. His skin had become a painful-looking dark purple, his eyes bloodshot and nearly bulging out of their sockets. His mouth was hanging open, his jaw slack to the point of appearing dislocated. He released this loud and awful croaking noise, something so inhuman that mere exposure to it induced a type of dread I had never felt before. There was something inside his mouth. It looked like a pale spider with the head of a wrinkled old man. He was just crawling around on his tongue, sporadically looking up and grinning. Suddenly, the idea of crawling through dirt didn't seem so bad. I backed away and told Rachel that we needed to get to the maintenance room ASAP. I must have looked pretty terrified because she asked me what I'd seen down there. I told her. She didn't want to know. She decided to look away. Seconds later, we were both running. The maintenance room was all the way on the other end of the building, but if we moved fast, we could get there in just a few minutes. Problem was, we couldn't move very fast. The air had become so thick that we nearly drowned in it. We had to inhale several large mouthfuls just to get enough oxygen to move forward a few steps. And that was another problem. The air itself was so extremely bitter that it was burning our throats and nostrils. The smoke was so heavy that it was hard to keep our eyes open for more than a few seconds before they started to sting like hell. And if all that wasn't enough, the light had been reduced to a fraction of its original brightness. It was hard to tell where we were going at all. But desperation's a pretty powerful force. We were convinced that all we needed to do was reach the maintenance room and we'd be free from this nightmare, and we didn't need to rationalize it. The fear of turning into one of those grotesque bloated heads was visceral enough to drive us ahead. Of course, it wasn't easy. In fact, I never thought something could be so excruciating. When I fell to my knees with a sharp stinging in my chest, Rachel helped me up. And when it happened to her, I did the same. Before we cleared the atrium, I took one last look over the railing to find that Jason's head had been joined by about a dozen more, all vaguely familiar faces that had been swollen and mutated into some horrendous version of the people they once were. Now the darkness had reached the second floor. By the time that we rounded the corner leading to the maintenance room, we were too compromised to stand. Unable to do much more than crawl, still, we pulled ourselves forward, our lungs aching and eyes burning. We could just barely see the outline of the door, and we were so close. And then we could see nothing at all. Not that it mattered, because we could no longer open our eyes without it feeling like they were being pierced by several hundred needles at once. Now every breath we tried to take seemed to get stuck in our throats, as if the air had turned into concrete. We were forced to hold it. We couldn't have been more than a few feet away, so we just kept crawling, feeling along the wall until we found the door. As we searched for the handle, we could hear that croaking noise echoing off the walls, much louder now, like several voices in unison, ones that sounded dangerously close. My head was flooded with images of those bloated heads floating towards us with their mouths wide open, the spider creatures ready to jump out at us and do who knows the fuck what. We managed to open the door before any of them could reach us, and once we were in, we wasted no time slamming it shut. It was pitch black inside. But now we could breathe. Now we could actually open our eyes. I took my phone and turned the flashlight on, half expecting to find some monstrosity staring down in the darkness. But there was nothing. We were alone. We gave ourselves a breather before looking for the light switch and then flipping it on. There were still traces of the smoke floating around from when we'd opened the door, but not enough for it to be suffocating. It was safe in here, for the time being. We could still hear the croaking through the wall, still getting louder, as if those things knew exactly where we were and had honed in on us. We barricaded the door with whatever miscellaneous shit we could find. A desk, some chairs, some buckets. I'm not sure why we were convinced it would help, but I guess it provided a modicum of comfort. We both took a deep breath and then opened up the hatch. Some clumps of dirt fell through. Now the croaking had turned into a roar. It sounded like it was right outside the door. There was a loud bang, and the room shook. One of the walls cracked. We looked at each other. Last chance to back out, but where the hell would we go? We climbed up the ladder and into the dirt. Never in my life had I imagined what crawling through sheer dirt might feel like, but it's hard to understate just how miserable of an experience it was. The weight of the earth crushing you from every angle, cold, damp soil clinging to your skin, your hair, soaking into your clothes, catching mouthfuls of soil as you struggle desperately to climb upwards. Every inch demanding almost every ounce of strength you have to offer. And the entire time we could still hear the croaking from below, feeling the rhythmic force of something pounding up against the ceiling like a drum beat through the dirt. At some point it sounded like something had managed to tear the ceiling apart. We just kept climbing. I lost track of exactly where Rachel was, but I could hear her struggling somewhere close by. I'm not sure how long we crawled for. It must have been a few minutes, but it also could have been an hour. My arms had never felt so heavy. I'd never felt so much strain on my lungs. The stench, the taste of metal, minerals, and earth was overwhelming that I was I was forced to swallow back puke. Sometimes I'd feel something biting my skin and I'd thrash my limbs until it stopped. But as bad as it got, I never stopped. It wasn't an option. I died from exhaustion before accepting whatever fate awaited us below. It was like ecstasy when I finally saw light. The smell of fresh air was sweet, warm enough to feel like a nice, dry blanket against my cold, wet skin. I pulled the rest of my body up to the surface just as my muscles surrendered for good. I flopped onto the ground, catching my breath, savoring the relief. After a while, I found the energy to sit up. I was in a forest. A strange one. The trees were like skyscrapers. Extremely thick trunks, extremely tall, standing to the sky. The branches were all a zigzag shape, interlacing with each other to form a bizarre but kind of beautiful pattern above. The plants around me were odd but stunning at the same time. Gigantic mushrooms that pulsed with neon light, colorful bushes with gelatinous orbs stuck into them, flowers over 6 feet tall, with tentacle-like protrusions that moved with the breeze. All around me were alien noises coming from hidden creatures. I got the sense that they all were aware of my presence. They just didn't want to be seen. But the place didn't feel dangerous. If anything, it was peaceful. I was too busy being blown away by it all that I'd forgotten about Rachel. She still hadn't made it up. I considered that maybe she'd become disoriented, started crawling in the wrong direction. I tried calling out to her. When I got no response, I began to dig back down. I didn't go far. Soon her head popped up from the dirt. Her face was covered by mud in a few areas where it wasn't. I could see that her skin had become beet red. She was coughing and gagging violently. I crawled over and helped pull her out the rest of the way. She knelt down and violently dry heaved before puking up a mouthful of dirt and vomit. She wiped the dirt away from her face as she gasped for air. I could see tears rolling down her cheeks. Happy tears. She was smiling. But we didn't linger. There was no guarantee that those things wouldn't eventually follow us up, so as soon as we'd recovered enough strength, we chose a direction at random, and we began walking. The soft dirt floor soon gave way to firmer grass, and after a while, we found a man-made path. There was a tree in front of it with what looked like a huge red arrow spray-painted across the trunk, pointing left. We debated with each other about whether or not to follow it. Rachel argued that it could have been a trap. I argued that it was a breadcrumb left by somebody who had been in a similar position to ourselves. We argued for a long time, switching positions every so often until we ultimately decided that our best option was just to follow it. It turned out to be a good decision. It first led us to a creek with water so unadulterated, so crystal clear, that we almost felt bad about using it to wash the dirt from our skin and clothes. There was another message spray-painted into the grass in front of it. Drinkable. The water was cold, smooth going down our throats. It tasted vaguely like honey. Then we continued on the path. Whenever it forked into multiple paths, there was always an arrow painted somewhere to guide us. As we walked, we encountered various different creatures. All of them bore some degree of resemblance to animals and insects we'd seen before, but not fully. Their colors were bright. Their skin and fur far more luminous. Their anatomy more beautifully intricate than anything we were familiar with. A stark contrast from whatever the hell we'd just escaped. We counted 22 arrows before we finally arrived at a small cabin in a clearing. I suppose the best way to describe it was rustic. Small structure, somewhat haphazard in appearance, but strangely inviting at the same time. We walked up to the front door, still somewhat wary about entering. We looked at each other, came to a silent agreement that we may as well, that we've already come so far. We knocked. When nobody answered, we tried the handle. Inside it smelled like wood, coffee, cigarettes. The place was bare bones save for a small desk. There was somebody sitting up in the chair behind it, sleeping with his face pointed to the ceiling and his mouth wide open. A young man with messy blonde hair wearing a jacket and jeans. A rifle was laid across his lap, one of his fingers still firm on the trigger. One of his hands was bandaged up. On the desk was a collection of paper, pens, notebooks, knives, box of ammunition, a steaming cup. We didn't immediately try to wake him, at the risk of startling the guy and having him pump us full of lead. We didn't have to. Soon an alarm clock went off and he jostled awake. When he saw us, he shrieked, began fumbling around with the rifle for long enough that we could have run over and snatched it away if we really wanted to. But we didn't. Once he'd gotten it steady in his hands, he stood up and pointed at us. We put our hands up. He just stared at us for a while before lowering it, letting out a sigh of relief. "Thank God," he said. "I'm so sorry, it's just nobody's come through for a long fucking time. Wasn't expecting it." And he smiled. "Glad to see you," he said. "I mean, I'm not glad that you're here, but it just gets so lonely sometimes. Nice to talk to somebody." We asked him where the hell we were. He shook his head, took a long exhale. "I'd be lying if I told you that I understood any of this," he said. "But I'll fill you in on what I can. Just be prepared to listen. It'll take a while." He walked over to a counter at the back of the room, upon which sat a pot of steaming black liquid. He poured out 2 cups of it, and then walked back over, handing one to each of us. "Black coffee with honey, pure grain alcohol," he told us, before sitting back down. "So, first things first, I gotta know. Where were you guys?" I asked him what he meant. I mean, where were you when you became trapped? Where all the crazy shit started. I was in a parking garage, getting ready to leave work. We told him that we were in a university, which seemed to disappoint him. He said that was boring, that somebody named Hansen had been in an abandoned insane asylum on a remote Arctic island, a journalist trying to uncover evidence of clandestine government experiments. To imagine what kind of shit he went through. We asked him who Hansen was. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an ancient-looking carton of cigarettes. He struck a match, lit one of them, took a few drags before answering. "Well, he's a survivor. We all are. And now, so are you two." If you're in San Antonio, Texas during the month of October, I really want to see you. So much so that I'm doing 2, count them 2, that's one and then another, live creepypasta reading at La Tida in San Antonio, Texas. If you want to find out more about that or figure out where La Tida is, take a look at the description down below. I have a link over to La Tida, which features, tea and eccentricities. During the month of October, I will be there October 11th and the 25th. And starting from the 25th, I'm also helping them put together a little haunted attraction or something of the sort at the tea shop. So, check it out if you're in the area. And if you're not in the area, then go to the area. San Antonio, Texas, October 11th and 25th. Also, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody on this list of Patreons. Some of these amazing folks are Diana Kraus, AcidSystem, Blake Rattler, Brandon Mendoza, Brenna Crow, Caltuna, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, CrusaderChocobo, Dakota Best, Daniel Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, Hades' Nephew, himbojerry, Our Minute Seconds Time, Ingegerd Salstrom, Jay Kearns, Jadis Pet, McMog, Mr. Marcus Splits, Psychomel, Plant Piz, Red Shadow Cat, Remember the Sun, Salty Surprise, Samara Lynn, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sully Man, Tully Sue, Team Leo 76, The Demented Voice in Your Head, The Chavez Brothers, The Ginger Bros, Tommy Walters, Viceroy Scorn, William Wellington, Your Bro Keegan, Zabub, and Shadow Gardens. A huge thank you to you guys, everybody who shows up in the description down below, and as always, folks, sweet dreams.